Why? She asked. Why take me back if you weren't planning to? Snatch Oscar. The old man grinned and pointed a finger at Alina. Because this naughty girl has been hiding from me. I've been waiting for her to show herself. Laura understood. When she'd told Alina about the devil rescuing her from Ion and the other Romanian girl, Alina had finally come out from her hiding place, revealing herself to the man who was hunting her. She snapped out of her reverie as she heard the old man speak. Again. Alina, you destroyed what I had in Romania. But it's fine. He smiled like a wolf. I can start again. Here in England. And I already have my first little piglet to take to market. Chapter 58. I asked Edward to make coffee while I booted up the laptop. While I waited, I grabbed a sheet of printer paper and attempted to draw a Venn diagram, with stick figures representing the players in this drama. In one circle, the Romanian would-be drug dealers, Ion and Alina and Camelia. In another circle, Gabor and his unnamed accomplice, the man at the house. On the periphery, unwittingly drawn into the drama, Aaron and Rob and Oscar. The policeman, Constantine, was there too, as was Edward. And in the center, where all these circles intersected, were Laura and me. Camelia had sold the laptop to Gabor. It had to be him. There were no other old Romanian men in the picture. I knew how Ion's group had gained access to my flat. They had the set of keys they took from Laura's backpack. I didn't know how Gabor got a key. Maybe he'd picked the lock. For now, it didn't matter. What are you doing? Edward asked, sitting down beside me. Checking my spyware. But you already did that, didn't you? I know. But only when the laptop was first returned. I didn't tell you about another weird thing that happened. I told him about the photographs from the train that had vanished before my eyes. For God's sake, Daniel, why didn't you tell me about that before? I was afraid that I'd imagined it. That I was losing my mind. If I wasn't crazy, there was only one possible explanation for the way the pictures had vanished. In the hospital car park, trying to work out Gabor's motive for returning the computer, I had remembered what had happened immediately before I saw the photos that vanished. I'd received the email with the kitten picture from Laura. Except I was willing to bet that it hadn't really been from Laura. If I'd looked closer at the time, I would no doubt have seen that it had come from an email address set up in Laura's name. And the picture of the kittens had contained what I was now looking for. Gabor must have guessed I'd check my laptop for viruses when it was mysteriously returned, so he delivered the virus later. I explained this to Edward as we waited for my virus-checking software to scan my machine. Then it stopped. An alert flashed up on the screen. I put my face in my hands. Fuck. What just happened? Edward asked. I tapped the laptop screen. There it is. Spyware. I turned my head to look up at him. A piece of software on my laptop that gave someone else remote access to the computer. They could see everything I typed. They could add and delete files. Can they see what you're doing now? Edward asked. I returned to the keyboard. A minute later I said, okay. I've blocked the connection. But they'll be able to see that I've blocked it. If they're looking right now, they'll know I'm onto them. And can you trace them? Find the other person's computer. Let's see. While I worked, Edward called Rob and Aaron's house and spoke to PC Davies, asking how the couple were doing. What did she say? I asked after he'd hung up, not looking up from the screen. I was getting close. Gabor's computer was still trying to connect to mine and I was trying to find the IP address of that computer. Aaron's gone to sit in the nursery, staring at Oscar's cot. Rob's gone out to search. Apparently, he couldn't bear to stay in the house doing nothing. The police have already gone door to door to talk to all the neighbors. Single quote. Did any of them see anything? She wouldn't tell me much. But Rob's got most of these neighbors out of their houses, and they're going round the adjoining streets. Single quote. I continued to type into the command box, edging closer to finding that IP address. Davies said they've shown Laura's photo on the news. It's all over the web. People on Twitter are going crazy, calling her a baby snatcher, sharing her picture. The whole country is looking for her. I winced. That's so wrong. She wouldn't have taken him. I returned to the screen, tapping commands into the box, edging closer. Gabor appeared to be using some out-of-the-box hacking software, not particularly sophisticated. He'd probably bought it off some kid on the dark web. Got it, I hissed. It. Edward asked, sitting up straight. The IP address. Right. Single quote. I went onto the web and pasted the IP address, a string of numbers, into a specialist website. The result came back within seconds, giving me the region along with the longitude and latitude. It doesn't give me the exact address, but. Single quote. I opened Google Maps and brought up the area in which the IP address was located. My eyes met Edward's. Back to the forest, I said, and a chill rippled across my skin. Chapter 59. The old man led them up the crooked path. First Laura, holding onto Oscar, her arms wrapped around the baby to guard against the bitter cold, then Alina, trailing behind, her chin dipped. Laura's legs were stiff and she felt like there was a swarm of flies buzzing inside her gut. Come on, the old man urged, unlocking the front door and grabbing Laura's elbow, pulling her inside. He was strong, and Laura suppressed a shudder at the thought of his hands on her flesh. He grabbed Alina too and shoved her, sending her staggering ahead of them into an entrance hall. The air smelled of dust and it was even colder, if that was possible, inside the house than out among the trees. Laura tried to catch Alina's eye but the Romanian woman had withdrawn again. Laura knew how terrifying this must be for her. Laura could only imagine what was going to happen, what it would feel like. Alina had been here before, in another house, another forest. And Laura wasn't scared for herself. All she cared about was protecting Oscar. The baby was quiet and motionless in her arms and she hugged him against her, worried that the cold was making him weak and listless. Cold and hunger. Could a baby his age go into shock? He needed his mum, he needed milk, warmth, familiar comforts. Her body pulsed with hatred for the man who had brought them here. Yes, just a man. And men could be hurt. The old man made a sweeping motion towards the stairs and swore at them when they held back. Do you want me to hurt the baby? He asked, reaching out, and Laura snatched Oscar away, which made the man laugh, then his face grew stern and impatient. Get up there. Laura went first, then Alina, the old man following. They went up one floor and he flapped his arms, telling them to climb to the next. Just as in the other house, there was a closed door at the top of the stairs. The old man reached past them and turned the handle. The door swung inwards and they stepped inside. Alina stiffened. Laura reached out to touch her arm. It was a replica of the room in Romania, but smaller with fewer beds and cots. No Polaroids on the wall. Yet. The two beds had white sheets and blankets, metal frames. 2 sets of cuffs were attached to the frames at each end of both beds. Laura could hear Alina's breathing grow heavier. She tried to stay calm, to take in the rest of the room. Next to the second bed was a white wooden cot. Piled up in the cot were several wool blankets, and Laura hurried over and snatched them up, wrapping them around Oscar. The old man watched her do this and blew on his hands. Good girl, he said. She turned to him. You can't believe you'll get away with this, do you? The police will find us. He smiled. You might want to feed him. He nodded towards the far wall, where a table contained numerous items, the kind of things you would find in the home of anyone with a small baby. Plastic bottles, tubs of formula milk, nappies and wipes, barrier cream and a packet of dummies. The windows were boarded up, planks of wood nailed across the panes. Can't have a repeat of what happened to Dragos, can we? The old man said to Alina. He nodded at Laura. Why don't you make the baby a drink? Laura hesitated, not sure what to do with Oscar. I'll take him, the man said. Laura thrust Oscar at Alina. The Romanian woman blanched. Take him, Laura urged, and Alina acquiesced, holding him as if he was made of crystal, like he might shatter in her arms. There was cold water in a jug. Laura poured some into a bottle and added 3 flat scoops of formula powder. He had never had formula milk before. Would he take it, especially cold like this? Would it make him sick? She took him back from Alina, sat down and gently pressed the teat against his lips. After a few moments, he took it and began to drink, obviously starving. She felt him relax, and he looked up at her with his big blue eyes. The old man watched. I knew you'd be a good mother, he said. The first time I saw you. I have a sixth sense for it now, after all these years. When you went into that sleeper carriage without the correct tickets, Laura's eyes widened with surprise. He laughed. Yes, I heard you all chatting about it. I was watching you, thinking how wonderful it would be to have you at my house. The beautiful, valuable babies you'd have. I watched this little bitch's boyfriend sneak into your carriage and come back, the two of them whispering together. Laura glanced over at Alina, who hung her head. And I was still watching as the train started to near my house and the border guards appeared. That's when I realized, I could make this happen. Laura stared at the old man as Oscar continued to drink from the bottle. I had a nice little chat with the border guards, told them about the arrogant English couple traveling in the sleeper without a ticket. That I'd heard you boasting about it, saying there was no way these Romanian morons would throw you off the train in the middle of nowhere. He was talking faster and faster now, his breathing growing heavier, excited by his own tale. He pointed at Alina. It worked out even better than I hoped. I wasn't expecting this one to get thrown off the train too. You're going to die, Alina said. He laughed. I'm starting to think I should only have brought the English woman. I only need her. He reached inside his jacket and took out a knife. Get on the bed, he said to Alina. Laura watched as Alina obeyed, lying flat on her back upon the empty single bed, her arms crossed over her chest, no emotion on her face. The old man snapped a cuff over one ankle, then the other. He did the same to her wrists. He pressed the sharp edge of the blade against Alina's throat and put his face close to hers. You killed my son, he said. It felt great. Alina continued speaking, switching to Romanian. Her voice was low, a sneer on her face as she spoke. The old man responded, also talking in his mother tongue. Although she couldn't understand the words, it was clear to Laura that Alina was taunting him, and that it was making him angry. His face grew pink as Alina spat harsh words at him, then laughed. Then she said something that made him stand straight and look at Laura, surprise in his eyes. He stared at her for a long moment, as Oscar finished his bottle, and then he laughed again. He was about to speak to her when Oscar opened his eyes and began to cry, a sudden wailing that made the old man clasp his hands over his ears. On the bed, Alina laughed, and the old man pointed the knife first at her and then at Oscar. Shut him up, he said. Laura tried to shush the baby, rocking him in her arms. He's still hungry, she said. I don't give a fuck. Shut him up now. He approached Alina again, the knife outstretched. The baby continued to scream, louder and louder, resistant to all attempts to quieten him. Alina's laughter grew increasingly hysterical, tears rolling from the corners of her eyes. Shut up. The old man yelled. Shut the fuck up. Something banged far below them. For a moment, Laura didn't think the old man had heard it above the infant wailing and the laughter. But then he stopped moving, cocked his head. Do anything while I'm gone and I kill this bitch and the baby, he said. He left the room and Laura heard the click of a key turning and a lock snapping into place. And as soon as he'd gone, Oscar fell silent, as if it was the evil old man's presence that had been making him scream. Alina stopped laughing and rolled her head towards Laura. Do exactly as I say, she said. Chapter 60. We drove into the forest and stopped 100 meters from the house we were looking for. As Edward killed the engine we were plunged into silence, as sudden as switching off a radio. I opened the door and got out, staggering like a newborn foal. The sight of the trees in the darkness made me cling to the car, my instincts screaming at me to get back in, get out of here, back to the city and lights and people. Here we are again. I felt like a man who is scared of heights standing on a cliff edge. I could hear the trees murmuring, stretching out their bare branches and whispering my name. Somewhere in the dense foliage, something shifted and darted away. This time you won't get away. Are you all right? Edward asked, joining me. I licked my dry lips. I thought I was going to be okay. But it's just like. Single quote. I swallowed, though there was no spit in my mouth. It's just like last time. You want me to go alone? He asked, placing a hand on my shoulder. You can wait here. No. No. I have to do this. They're just trees. It's just a forest. And the place we're going, it's just a house. And the man we're looking for, he's just a monster. We don't know for certain this is the right place, Edward sighed. It is. I can feel it. He didn't respond to that. We had stopped briefly in the village on the edge of Hatfield Forest and gone into the pub, asked the barmaid if she knew of any houses in the forest that had been sold or rented recently. A large, secluded house, probably. I felt certain that Gabor would look for something familiar. And if he had been planning to take Laura and Oscar, he would need somewhere without close neighbors. The old witch's house, said a man at the bar with pockmarked skin. I whirled to face him. What? I was thrown back to the night in the forest, standing at the door, a little boy's voice in my head telling me a witch lived here. It's not actually a witch's house, laughed the barmaid, who was in her mid-40s, with twinkling eyes. People just call it that because the local kids all said the woman who lived there ate children. She died, 5 years ago now. I heard someone had bought it, said the man with the acne scars. They drew us a map showing us how to get there, not asking us why we were looking for it. I still think we should have called the police, Edward sighed now, looking along the dark path that led in the direction shown on the map. We should have left it to them. This fucker firebombed my office, almost killed Sophie, and me. We had figured out that Gabor must have seen me submitting the online contact form to Edward and felt compelled to act. I guessed that was his main reason for spying on me. To see if I had told anyone about what I'd seen in Romania. I tried to follow his reasoning. It would be much riskier for him if he killed me or Laura. There would be an investigation, a manhunt. It was much harder to get away with murdering a middle-class couple in the middle of London than in remote Romania. He must have been out of his criminal comfort zone, a spider straying from his web. So he'd decided to watch. To see if we did anything that necessitated the risk. We've been over this, I said. I knew if we went back to the police we would have to go through the whole story, the details of how we'd traced Gabor, in great detail. It would take time we didn't have while Laura and Oscar were in danger. And there was another reason, I wanted to do this myself. I wanted this chance to make things right. We had a single torch between us, just as Laura and I had when we walked through the forest looking for Alina. This path was wider, was in fact an unmade road, but everything else felt the same. I had come full circle, back to the beginning of a journey I hadn't wanted to go on. Tonight, one way or another, that journey would end. The torchlight traced patterns in the trees. I saw faces there, not animals or monsters or witches, but people. Women and children, their mouths twisted into screams. Black eyes focused on me. I thought I could see dead babies hanging from the branches. Imagined children peering from between the trees, whispering, "Go back. Go home." I stopped, paralyzed by fear, my legs refusing to do what I told them. I heard another noise that sounded like a growl. It faded to a whisper, and that was worse. Edward put his hand on my shoulder. I cried out. "Daniel, calm down. It's okay. We're fine. You can do this." I nodded. I could do this. We continued along the path. It curved to the right and as we Rounded the bend, Edward sighed, there it is. The house loomed up out of the darkness, glowing faintly in the moonlight that bathed the clearing. Now we were free of the trees. Once again I was thrown back to the events of last year. The big difference was that this time I had come prepared. I had a kitchen knife in the inside pocket of my coat, which I hadn't told Edward about, sure he would try to stop me. I had my phone too, fully charged, though when I looked at it I saw that the signal here was extremely weak, just 1/2 bar, and number 3G. We walked between two crumbling brick walls into the courtyard of the house, where a black car was parked. Can you hear that? I asked. He nodded. From high above came the faint sound of a crying baby. I peered through the car's window and quickly called Edward. Over. That's Laura's, I whispered. There was a hair scrunchie lying on the back seat. Laura's poppy scrunchie. Are you sure? I'm certain. I was with her when she bought it. She wears it all the time. The baby stopped crying. I think we should call the police. No. We don't have time. He took a deep breath. Okay. Right. We can't just go up and knock on the door. Let's go round the side, see if we can find a way in. We crept along the edge of the house and found a pile of firewood logs stacked up on an apron of concrete along the wall. Above them was a small window with a rotten frame. Let me take a look, Edward sighed. He climbed onto the woodpile and grabbed the windowsill, straining to peer through the window, to shine the torch into the dark interior. I put my hand on my chest. I couldn't believe my heart could beat so hard or so fast. I can't see any. His words were cut off as the log on top of the pile wobbled and suddenly the whole stack toppled from beneath him. I jumped out of the way and Edward clung to the sill, his legs dangling 2 feet from the ground. The logs rolled to the concrete with a series of loud bangs. Edward held on for a few seconds, then dropped, falling onto his side before pushing himself up and inspecting his fingers. The torch rolled away towards the grass and blinked off, leaving us in the pale moonlight. Edward shook his head. I'm going to call the police. This is ridiculous. He took out his phone and began to dial. Distracted by this, I didn't see the man appear around the corner from the front of the house. By the time I noticed him, and realized it was Gabor, he was raising the shotgun he held and pointing it at us. Edward! I shouted. He looked up from his phone just as Gabor fired his weapon. Edward twisted as he fell to the ground. He didn't make a sound. I froze for a second, watched Gabor point the shotgun towards me, and somehow managed to make my legs work. I dived to the right, away from the house, the second blast of the shotgun reverberating in my ears. I lay in the mud, a few feet from where Edward lay. He wasn't moving. I saw Gabor walk towards us, reloading the shotgun as he came, a grim expression on his face. I scrambled to my feet and ran towards the back of the house, certain that I would at any second hear another blast, feel the lead in my back. I turned the corner of the house and saw a small coal shed on the edge of the lawn. I ran towards it and ducked behind it, crouching in the overgrown grass, peeking out towards the house as Gabor came around the corner, looking left and right. I can see you, he said. Come out. I won't kill you. How fucking gullible did he think I was? I scrabbled in my pocket for my phone and, using my body to conceal the light from the screen, checked if I had any signal. Still half a bar. My hands were shaking so much I could hardly hit the numbers on the screen. 9. Drop the phone. I looked up. Gabor stood over me, the shotgun barrel a few inches from my face. My thumb hovered over the final 9. Drop the phone now, he barked, jabbing the gun at me. Now. I did what he said. He stamped on it, cracking the screen. Stand up. Hands in the air. Again, I did what he told me. The knife was in my inner pocket, but even if I was fast enough to grab it without getting shot, what could I do with it? My kitchen knife against his shotgun. I might as well have been carrying a teaspoon. He smiled now. I'm actually glad you found me. You're the final loose end. The last one who knows anything about my son and our business. I stared at him. Except you don't know all the details, do you? He shrugged. Sorry. You'll have to die without knowing the full story. He pointed the shotgun at my face. I held up a hand, as if I could stop a shotgun blast. Where's Laura? What have you done with her? And baby Oscar? He grinned, if you could call it that. It was the grin of a crocodile looking at a wildebeest. Don't worry about them. He steadied the shotgun again. I cringed, waited for the blast. But he hesitated, as if he were savoring the moment. Could I extend that moment, keep him talking, get to the knife in my pocket and surprise him? Please, I said. Just answer one question. He nodded, the shotgun barrel still trained on my face. I sucked in a breath. The photos. Was that you? When did you take them? My hand crept towards my pocket. Another nod. While Alina was having her passport checked. I snuck in, saw you were snoring like pigs and took a couple of snaps with my phone. I sent them to my son so he'd know who exactly he was looking for. But why show me those photos? He shrugged with one shoulder. I was trying to flush out Alina. I thought you would tell your girlfriend about it, that the two of you would figure out that Alina was back. Help lead me to her. My fingers brushed the edge of my pocket. Why did you delete the photos? Because it amused me, Daniel. I pulled out the knife and lunged at his leg. He dodged it easily, stepping aside and kicking at my hand and sending the knife skittering away. He laughed. It's a shame we can't talk for longer, he said. I've seen and heard about some things I'd love to tell you about. He pointed the barrel of the shotgun at my face. I closed my eyes. I was going to die. Worse, I had failed to save Laura and Oscar. I deserved this. Chapter 61. Pull my boot off, Alina said as soon as they heard the old man's footsteps recede down the staircase. The left one. Laura laid the now sleeping Oscar gently in the cot and did as Alina asked. It slid off easily and Laura was thrown back to a moment in the past, finding this very boot lying on the path among the trees. Now pull out the inside part. The insole. She nodded as well as she could. Laura hooked her fingers around the edges of the insole. It was still warm and emitted a faint, unpleasant odor. It made a ripping noise as she pulled it out. Behind her, Oscar stirred in the cot but remained asleep. Be careful, Alina said. Under the insole should be a small piece of metal. Laura tipped the boot up gently and felt something drop into her palm, then bounce from her grasp and drop to the floor. Fuck. Please, Laura, you have to find it. Laura dropped to her hands and knees, peering under the bed. She spotted the piece of metal straight away. Her heart thumped as she reached beneath the bed to retrieve it, gripping it firmly between forefinger and thumb. I got it. Alina exhaled. What is it? Laura asked, standing up. The object was the shape and size of a small key, but without teeth, just an oval head and a long flat stem. It's called. I don't know the English word. A saber. You need to unlock my hands first. Hold the round part and slide it into the cuff, where the teeth are. Laura knelt on the edge of the bed and leaned over Alina. She took the cuff in her hand and inserted the saber into the space between the teeth and ratchet. Now, push down on the teeth as if you are tightening the cuffs, and push the saber in at the same time. Laura did this and, to her amazement, heard a click. Now, undo it. She pulled the cuff open, freeing Alina's left arm. You came prepared, Laura said, as she moved around the bed to work on the other handcuff. It is the first thing I bought when I came here. I spent months chained to a bed. I was never going to risk that happening again. I'm so sorry, Laura said, her voice cracking. We thought he shot you as soon as we left. We tried to report it but. Single quote. I know. The old man. Single quote. His name is Nikolai Gabor. I found his name on some papers in the house. Along with the names of all his victims. All the women he and his son raped and murdered in that place. They are here now, with us. Urging me on. Her eyes glinted. Laura looked at the air around Alina. She nodded. I can feel Them. I have the names of all the babies too, the families they sold them to. It's in my back pocket. Take it. She lifted her bottom and Laura plucked a crumpled sheet of paper from the back pocket of Alina's jeans. Look after it, Laura. It's the only chance those children have for justice. Promise me. I promise. She hesitated. I'm so sorry that we left you there, in that house, with him. Alina shrugged. His son was worse. Laura shook her head, continuing to work on the cuffs. This one was awkward, refusing to open. I'm glad I went to that house, Alina said. Laura gaped at her. They'd have gone on doing it if I hadn't. Laura saw it then. Yes. They had been meant to go to that house. She went back to work on the cuffs. When I think about how close we came to not going there. Alina shook her head. Gabor gave Dragos hell about almost screwing it up. I heard them. We made the first part of it easier for them. Dragos was meant to intercept us at the station, pretend to be a helpful stranger or force us to go with him at gunpoint, I don't know. But he was slow. By the time he got going, we were already walking along the tracks towards him. The second cuff clicked open and Alina rubbed her wrists. Laura handed her the sabre so Alina could work on her ankle cuffs herself. While Alina worked, she said, if I hadn't gone into the woods, I guess he would have intercepted us on the tracks, at the closest point to the house. That's when it started to go wrong. He grabbed me, took me back. Gabor was furious that Dragos didn't just leave me there, tie me up and go straight back to you. But he was overexcited, started tugging at my clothes, telling me all the things he was going to do to me. He was never that talkative again. The third cuff clicked open and she moved on to the final one. He was so busy taunting me that he didn't hear you and Daniel enter the house. You know what happened next. But he didn't tell his dad that you were ever there, that you escaped. Too ashamed. Gabor believed that you must have thought I'd run off, and that you didn't know the house existed. When Dragos eventually told him the truth, Gabor went crazy. I heard him beating Dragos. He was screaming at him, saying you and Daniel could have gone to the international police. But you didn't, did you? Laura closed her eyes, shame washing over her. Because you'd been and gone and weeks had passed by the time Dragos told him, Gabor assumed they were safe. I have poison, Alina said, looking Laura in the eye. Cyanide tablets. What, like a suicide pill? Or murder? Alina paused and looked at Laura intently. I planned to give them to you and Daniel. Laura stared at her. Alina continued to work on the final cuff. Gabor was right. I wanted to punish you for leaving me behind, for not going to the police. The real police, I mean. Not that shit Constantine. And also, I couldn't bear the shame. You knew what had happened to me. I didn't want anyone to know about it. I thought if I removed everyone who knew of my ordeal, I would be free. I could start fresh. Be born again. You understand that, don't you? The two women locked eyes. My plan was to kill you and Daniel, then go back to find Gabor. So why didn't you do it? Laura asked, her voice shaky, as Alina unlocked the final cuff, then reached for her boot and pulled it back on. I was going to. But then I saw Gabor. At the hospital. What? He was looking for you. He got your name from Constantine, didn't he? I think he must have been following you, hoping you would lead him to me. Laura shook her head. Of course, she had known Gabor, the devil, as she called him then, had been watching her. She remembered the day she had almost fallen under the tube train, sensing somebody watching her on the street. Had he pushed her? Or was that Alina? She was too frightened to ask.